charm. Uh, so, I'm going to take this opportunity to sort of say that my presentation is loaded with words and quotes, and I love quotes, and I feel like people who articulate speak to me, and I'm going to try to speak to you all through that articulation. So please excuse the many quotes that the presentation has. I'll start with Aristotle. He says, we are what we repeatedly do, and excellence then is not an act but a habit. So when we were given the theme of obsession, I was trying to find a way to create a context to talk about my practice, and this felt like an appropriate quote to begin with. So when we think of this idea of obsession, what comes to mind is preoccupation, repetition, persistence, immersion, uh, and I think one navigates all of this in the realm of obsession at different levels. Again, two more quotes, which kind of lean to emotion. This is T.S. Eliot. Music hurts so deeply that it is not heard at all, and you are music. Now they become the dance, now the dance becomes them. This is Gary Zukav and the Dancing Woolly Masters. So, for me, this idea of obsession needs some kind of a hook. It needs some kind of something to latch on to and drive my practice. And for me, that hook is purpose. So, everything that we do at studio or everything that I choose to do personally, I need purpose to be the fallback. How do I find purpose? Uh, it's actually very easy. What do I see meaning in? What speaks to my heart? And then convert that into the fallback or the purpose. For me, philosophy is also very important because I see philosophy as that point which helps to translate the purpose to action. Uh, Let me talk to you all about my practice. I run Studio Anugraha, which is co-founded and comprises of a large team of people and collaborators. Through Anugraha, I find my purpose. Through Anugraha, I find my obsession. Through Anugraha, I find my existence. Anugraha is essentially a collaborative design practice. And for me, from the time I was studying, purpose seemed to be in this idea of causes, in this idea of ideas, and less in products. So, the philosophy that the studio works with at the moment is that we don't design for anything that promotes consumerism directly. So, for us, we do products, but products are only byproducts of ideas and causes. So, that forms most of the work, that forms the anchor point for most of the clients and projects that we do at Anugraha. We use books as a format of expression more often than not because books inherently, I think, offer engagement with depth. They offer this immersion, this prolonged process. Books allow monotony, books allow boredom, and I think monotony and boredom are great because they come with insights, they aid in immersion. How do we make books? A lot of the books that we make uh, have on field documentation as the primary way of working. We bring in content from being on field. Our subject matter, the communities that we work with are all on field. When you're on field, there's always two options, I think. There's a way of looking at everything that you encounter in a representative way or in a comprehensive way. We try to lean to the latter because we feel like we play the role of facilitators. And as facilitators, we'd like to be in the background and we like our voices, our communities to be the foreground. within facilitation, within bookmaking, within uh, this whole idea of aligning to purpose, one of the key things is typologizing and pattern spotting. So all of our on-field documentation has a lot of visual and textual content that comes in, and then as a process, uh, it becomes important to connect dots and to look at patterns and systems. I like this quote by Charles Eames, who says that eventually everything connects, people, ideas, and objects, and it's the quality of connections which is the key to quality per se. And lastly, collaboration. None of what we can do can happen without collaborating. Uh, it's like we function like pieces of a puzzle, and right now I'm here representing a large team of people, just being the face of it, but it's immersion from all members that leads to everything that we do. I believe that for us to function, clarity of concept is very important at a personal level, but when it comes to implementation, clarity of action is very important, because then that can be communicated to the team and it then manifests in a way that it works for the projects. Some modes of working for us are framestorms, brainstorms, and mind maps. I'll go on a little quick now with visuals. These are just some images from the studio. We spend a lot of time on studio floors doing mind maps and brainstorms. We like to work with different materials and media, this watercolors, working with thread, working with Lego. We do a lot of books, and within books we do various processes which include research on field documentation, content structures, information architecture, photography, image making, book design, print and production. Sometimes we are only forming visual narratives and we're working and collaborating with writers. At other times we're illustrating books. Sometimes we're doing reports and fundraising booklets. I'm going to now take this opportunity to talk about one particular project which the studio has worked on for a long time. This is documenting the Kumbh Melas. So we had a commission. Anugraha as a studio was born in 2012, and this was because of a commission where a patron came by and said that he'd like us to document the Kumbh. So I'm just going to take you all through a 5-minute journey of this process of documentation. What does it mean to capture a tradition through a set of books? What are the realities on ground? For us, we went into the Kumbh landscape as blank slates. We'd never been to a Kumbh before. And how does one make a book on a subject that one has no idea about? That was the kind of project that came our way. So initially, it was a lot of hesitation. Only then we realized that this was a landscape which thrived on people, and people from all walks of life, and people that made it happen were the people who would make the content or the voices in the book. So when this thought came to mind is when we realized that we could engage in such an endeavor. So I'd like to describe the process of this entire documentation in 2 words, which is emergence and self-organization. So as makers of the book, as facilitators of the book, we were not authors. We were only curators and editors. And all the voices and authors were the people that formed this landscape. So across 3 Kumbhs, we spoke to 175 people from all walks of life, like acharyas, adhikaris, akhada members, saints, government officials, the heads of security and traffic, health and sanitation officers, pilgrims, devotees, historians, everybody that we encountered in the landscape we spoke to. As all of us might be familiar, the Kumbh is known for its scale. It's an incredible logistical operation. It's a pop-up megacity. It's millions of people, and everything that we see in media is essentially depicting scale, mostly. So our endeavor was to find what were these individual stories that form the collective. We documented 3 landscapes of Allahabad, Nasik, and Ujjain, where you have the 3 rivers, the Sangam at Allahabad, of Ganga, Yamuna, and the invisible Saraswati, the Godavari flowing through Nasik, and the Shipra in Ujjain. What was interesting in this documentation was that although it stood for the same philosophy in some ways, visually everything changed because each of these kumbhs happened in different seasons, which meant that the built structures, the way people dressed, everything was aligned to season. And as people documenting visually, there was a stark difference, therefore. I'll take you all through a few snippets from the books to just suggest the kind of content that there is. So we were after individual stories, right? So some of the stories that we found were purely visual, and there were others which emerged from conversation. And our mode of inquiry was very simple. Every time we saw something visually that we didn't understand, we would ask people. And every time people spoke to us about something that we didn't know, we would then go and spot it in the landscape. So it was just something as basic as that. The only receptivity that this needed was keeping an open mind to everything that we encountered and diligently logging. So this is an example of milkmen in Allahabad who, during the Kumbh, before delivering milk to the houses, they pour some milk into the Ganga every morning. So if you go between 6 and 6:15 in the morning, you'll find a fleet of milkmen pouring milk into the river and then going and delivering. And this happens only during the Kumbh. Another time at the Kumbh, we spotted this man with a candy striped scooter, and we were very curious. Every time we saw him, we spotted him a few times. Every time we saw him in different garbs, like 2 of these are here. And we were just wondering what he was doing because people were even bowing down to him. And we found out that he said that his way of serving people and serving God was to make people smile. So he was just inherently, it was his thing every single day to dress up in different garbs. Another thing that we visually spotted was large groups of women garlanding bridges. So the river is worshipped as goddess, and in order to, the closest that they could get to the river was the bridges. Therefore, 1.5-kilometer long bridges were just being garlanded, and these women would sing and garland them. Different expressions of faith. On the lighter side, during the Kumbh, lot of people and therefore lot of coins in the rivers. These are children of boatmen who fling magnets into the rivers and fish out coins. On a more sort of serious note, we obviously spoke to health, sanitation, security, traffic control, all of these people who manage the logistical infrastructure and management of the Kumbh. This is Kavindra Pratap Singh, who was the then head of security and traffic control. And they would, in conversation, give us insights about crowd management, all the strategies they deployed. One of the things he said was that a stoppage at one point potentially was a stampede at another, which meant that they had to make sure that there was constant circulation. So even if they had to direct people the wrong way, they would do it because they would want to make sure that there is no stampede. So there were more serious insights through conversations like that. So this is just a glimpse of the kind of content. Moving on to off-field, the one thing that we diligently did every day while we were documenting at the Kumbh was to log everything that we spotted, log all the conversations, and of course video, sound, and video record, sound record, and take still pictures. Because ultimately our documentation was only primary research. So the whole bibliography of the books was this day log that made its way in there. The one thing that was a conscious decision to do was to deploy one member of the team to look at local newspapers in Hindi, English, and in Marathi every single day of the Kumbh and tag all the events, because the on-field team needed to be informed of all that was going on. I'll jump onto how we arrived at the books. So the commission was essentially one book, but what manifested was 8 volumes. This is because the Kumbh as a landscape is such a huge, it's like a world in itself. It's a microcosm of its own. And how did we do this? So every interview that we had, we tagged it for various categories. And at the end of tagging 80 conversations in Allahabad, we had about 60 odd tags that showed up. And then we started to group them, and we arrived at 24, after which we couldn't group any further. And that's why it translated into 8. Also, I talk about this idea of emergence. So all the content offers us the system. Essentially, that's how we work. So in this case, the sort of identification factor for the Allahabad Kumbh is the Sangam, where the 3 rivers meet, which is unique to Allahabad. So we wanted Ganga, Yamuna, and Saraswati to be the name of one of the books, which was about rivers and ritual. So the trilogy offered us the system of trilogy, which means all our books were 3, 3, 3, and that allowed for 24 tags. And then as we aggregated, we realized that it would be nice if each answers a question. So that's how the books kind of came together. These are the voices, they form the content, and each book is preceded by the voices, and all the content is attributed to them as you navigate. Visually, we had a system that we created for the information architecture of the books. So each book was given a color, and at the Kumbh, one finds flags everywhere, and they are unifiers, at the same time separators. So we used flags as a way of creating an infographic system. These are the books, and each book has 8 different styles of writing, which we represent with a flag. So the information architecture comes together with color and flags to represent the categories and the styles of writing. This is the map of Sangam, which we use metaphorically for the information architecture of the books. So this is like an overlay of the kinds of writing along with the aspects which makes the whole documentation. I'll go through all of these pages. These are just spreads in the books. We designed a display font for the books, very diligently done by one of my colleagues, Carol, who's sitting in the audience. So this font was created for the books. And this is just a glimpse. This is an example that made its way into a character story. This is a diary note. This is a photo story. This was turned into a poetic verse. These were interviews left as interviews. So this is just a glimpse, and each book has all of these 8 kinds of writing in them. So as a reader, you're not confronted with monotony. You basically navigate from something very visual to textual, and then you find something poetic and something like a scrapbook. One aspect that I'd like to mention is publishing. We publish these books as well, and this is something we're not preempted. While all the people we spoke to knew that they were talking to us because we were publishing, but all our content was really in Hindi when we spoke, and the books are in English. So it went through translation, and when it went through translation, we felt responsible to show people what we translated before we published. Because in translation, a lot can be lost, and especially this kind of content which is philosophical in some way. And also because each person would probably make their way into more than one book. Because if you spoke to me about river and management at the Kumbh, you would go in book 3 and in book 8. So that way, at the end, we had to make PDFs and physical prints of where each person was, go back to them, and show them, how they were represented, get their approval, and then publish. And this took us 6 months to do before the design draft and publishing. We have a lot of stories even around this search. One example is this was a lady from MP, Madhya Pradesh, who was at the Kumbh, and we couldn't trace her. Her address didn't exist, her phone number didn't exist. Tirtha, who's here in the audience again, had the presence of mind to look at a hoarding that was behind her, the pandal hoarding. We found the number of the flex printer, called him up, and he told us that their ashram had shifted, and then we got their contact, and therefore so this is one of the many stories in the zone of publishing. This is just the package, and for us the two-layered narrative allowed for different ways of sharing this work. So in the exhibit of the book launch, our space segregation was by kinds of writing. So everything that was interviews was on one wall, everything that was photo stories was on one. So this allowed different kind of clustering. So people who wanted to read more were in one corner, whereas the books were by aspects. This was at the Venice Biennale, where we collaborated with Rahul Mehrotra and the Howard team. They were also at the Kumbh doing research and published a book, but all their data was more statistical, and ours was anthropological with people's stories. So this kind of complemented for them to put it up. So it was the pavilion was designed by them, but we fed in with the material that we had. So I'll just quickly go through this. What you saw was the Allahabad Kumbh. This is the Nasik Kumbh. I'm just going to run the slides and only stop at a couple, which is a different kind of information architecture and a visual design system. So here what we did was, when we came back from Nasik, we sat down as a team and we brainstormed and thought of all the possible words that we could associate with the Kumbh landscape. And then we grouped them into common nouns, proper nouns, and abstract nouns. For all the abstract nouns, we came up with a system of patterns that then made their way into the book. Now these were designed in a way that if you miss them, you won't lose anything. But for us as designers, there's a system, and if you spot them, there'll be meaning. All the common nouns, we created vector drawings for them, because things like barricades is something that you spot in the landscape very often. So everything that is visually very recognizable, we created vectors. And for all the proper nouns, there were photographs. So the books come together with this aggregation of common nouns, proper nouns, and abstract nouns as a design system. And here in Nasik, we found that a lot of things were contradictory. So we had several viewpoints on the same subject. So as people anchoring this book, we had to footnote. So every page of the book has footnotes, and every sentence is attributed to who said what, because then it allows the reader to make the decision of what to believe. I spoke about typologies. So because we have this sea of visuals and information from the Kumbh documentation, we have several typologies. Like the first one on the left is just saffrons. The one after is just tikas. The one below is just modes of transport. The one on top is just queues at the Kumbh. The one below is water engagement. So like this, there are like 70, 80 typologies that have emerged from the sea of images that has been documented. And then, of course, all of these come together in the design system. There's also a documentary, and the line drawings have been animated in it. And then there have been some more opportunities to exhibit. So I'll just conclude by saying that personally, my role in the project has been that of an anchor. And these are some things that as a facilitator and an anchor, I keep reminding myself. And there are also aspirations to kind of imbibe fully. So I keep telling myself that it's not about directing, it's about anchoring. In communication, it's always about what I have understood, not what you've said, because there can be a rift there. Then what must be done is important, not who did it. And in relationships, it's always to be, people are more important. The to do will follow. And then, as again, people documenting, show not what I want to show, but show how they want to be seen. And lastly, for me, design is, I would say that design should never say, look at me. It should always say, look at this. Again, I'm going to flip because we are on obsession. I draw and I draw every night almost before sleeping because it helps me to sleep better. So these are just drawings. I draw a lot of lotuses and patterns. So I think with all the body of work, for us, it's always that all inspiration lies in the intangible. We make tangible to evoke the intangible. That sums up, I think, everything for me personally and also in the practice. And I'll leave you all with this image. Thank you.